believe you me, the other side do hate. The other side do hate. I mean, it is, we kind of think they're a bit soft in the head. They think we're evil. They think we're evil. And they think there are no limits to where they're prepared to go to try and get their point of view. You see, they actually think they're better people than us.
From Nomad Capitalist Live in Mexico City, I'm Andrew Henderson. We are joined all the way from Southeast England by a gentleman many of you will realize, Mr. Nigel Farage. It is a great pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
I hear you're talking to our delegates. It's been a rousing occasion here, and we appreciate your doing that. But I have one question before we get started, and we'll let you tell people who may not know, if you've been living under a rock, who you are. Farage Gin, you have your own gin brand now, and you and Max Kaiser are talking about Farage Gin and Tonics. What's going on with that?
Yeah, well, I found a very small artisan maker of gin, handmade, hand-bottled, and I've got a red one, a white one, and the blue one. Well, of course, red, white, and blue, obviously. And it's Farage Gin, and it's out in time for Christmas. And it's a great present because, if your dad is a passionate Brexiteer, he's going to love a bottle of Farage Gin. But let's say your dad is a Remainer and can't stand Nigel Farage. What better joke present could there possibly be? So we're appealing to both markets. That's
the trend, though, I think, is the artisan handmade, I guess, in the UK.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, in a world that's been completely dominated by the global corporatists, and they've been allowed by government, they've been allowed by legislation to control every market, there is now a rebellion. Microbreweries in America springing up everywhere, little gin makers all over the UK. And actually, do you know what? People want to buy products. If they can buy products, even if they're a little bit more expensive, but if they can buy cheese that's not been made by some massive factory or handmade gin. And there's a lesson there, I think, for all of us. There is a lesson there that there is consumer demand to have stuff that is not homogenized, not globalized. And I think Nomad Capitalist delegates get that.
We do get that. Are you going to follow the George Clooney playbook? Are we going to see a big exit on Farage Gin in coming years?
Well, who knows? It's early days. I've dealt with one exit already. That was called Brexit. But let's wait and see.
Well, Brexit. So you were, can we say, Mr. Brexit. For folks who may be familiar with you, walk us through your story.
Well, my story is very simple. I left school. I went straight to work. I skipped university. The reason was Margaret Thatcher had just been elected. The financial services industry was being deregulated. Exchange controls were abolished. Innovation was coming. London was developing as a global marketplace. So I went to work, my first job, for Drexel Burnham Lambert, of famous Wall Street fame. And they had a subsidiary working on the London Metal Exchange, dealing in copper, aluminum, lead, tin, zinc, nickel, the big industrial metals. And I spent time with them. I spent time with Revco, who were a massive Chicago company. So I spent 20 years dealing all around the world with producers and consumers of metal, and speculators too. And it was from that I began to see what I now know as globalism, as this idea that somehow we would centralize decision-making, we would regulate literally everything that moved. And the epicenter of it was the creation of the European Union. And I thought, what the hell are we doing? As a global trading nation that speaks English, has all these wonderful connections around the world, why are we linking ourselves inextricably with our next door neighbors under a form of government that is centralizing, that is, frankly, an updated form, sort of right-wing communism, basically, is how I saw it. And so I made the move into politics because I wanted to free our country from it. Now, I did succeed. The trouble is, I lost a quarter of a century in the intervening years.
Nothing happens overnight.
No, big change doesn't. And what you learn is that the biggest tyranny in mankind is always the status quo. There is a settled status quo. Everyone's happy where they are. They don't want anybody upsetting the apple cart. And when fresh voices come along, be it in science or politics or business, and someone comes along and says, hey guys, you're all going the wrong way, necessarily that individual gets demonized for doing so. And I had my fair share of that.
You've done that.
I've lived it.
We may have to commiserate. I think you probably have it worse than I, but we may have to commiserate. So you led Brexit, and when did that all start?
Well, for me, back in the early 90s. It was in the early 90s that I made my mind up. This was all going wrong. The best example was pegging the pound to something called the exchange rate mechanism. And history teaches us fixed currency pegs always end in disaster. Yet that's what was happening. So that really got me going. And then I first got elected to the European Parliament in 1999. So I was there for 21 years until I finally was able to get up and wave my Union Jack and say goodbye.
So, yeah, you're a member of the European Parliament, so you would go to Europe and basically work with people and be around people that you despise, basically. Is that too strong?
No, they despise me.
Okay, you don't despise, you're just like, I just want to be out.
I didn't despise them. I thought they were wrong.
Right.
I was never rude to them. If you look at my speeches, I teased them.
I've watched the speech, yeah,
I teased them. I wasn't vitriolic or vile. I took the mickey out of them. I had some fun at their expense. They couldn't take it because humour.
They're pretty humorless people.
I mean, the bureaucrat is, you know. So yeah, I did it every week for 20 years. I mean, here's the point. Most people who get elected to parliaments around the world as challengers, they generally, within 2 or 3 years, get taken in by the system and become a bit less rebellious. I didn't. In fact, the more I saw of it, the more I thought it was anti-democracy, anti-free market capitalism, anti-liberty. And the more I saw of it, the less I liked it. Now, it wasn't easy. I mean, in the end, there were coffee bars that wouldn't serve me, pubs that wouldn't serve me, restaurants that wouldn't serve me. I mean, that is how hated I was in Brussels. And it's a very unusual thing to find a person that doesn't care. But I just didn't care. I didn't care. I believed I was right. I believed I was doing the thing that needed to be done. And more than prepared. And you know what? I wouldn't want these people as friends anyway.
Yeah. I think these are your people out here, much more so than they are. So the run-up to Brexit, yeah. David Cameron said, all right, we'll do a thing.
So Cameron said when he was first elected leader, we must stop banging on about Europe. Let's not even discuss it. Yeah. And I challenged him, and I started to get the UK Independence Party, a challenger party. We started to get millions of votes. Millions of votes. And we were getting votes from both sides. Both Labour and Conservatives were voting for us. But the psychological effect we had on Cameron was huge. He feared that my little upstart party would overtake the 200-year Conservative Party unless he did something. And he was right. He was right. We literally would have wiped them off the face of the planet. So the promise for a referendum, and as soon as he promised the referendum, he thought, well, that's great. That's the end of Nigel Farage. But of course, all that did was legitimise me. It meant the very thing I'd been calling for was now mainstream. And in the end, it looked very unlikely, and we had the whole world against us, and President Obama flying into London, being told we'd lose our house, we'd lose our job, we wouldn't have medicines, diseases would spread. The whole thing was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. But we still, despite everything, voted to leave. Then they made a complete mess of it again. They replaced Cameron with a woman called Mrs. May. She never believed in it. We didn't leave. So I had a second coming politically when I came back with the Brexit Party, and we had a European election, another European Parliament election in May 19, and I put a coalition together called the Brexit Party. We didn't just win the election, we got 50% more votes than the nearest party. It was the Tories' worst result in 200 years. So once again, they looked down the barrel of oblivion, got rid of May, and then in came Boris. So Boris, I mean, to be honest, Boris wouldn't have been there without me. He wouldn't have been there.
He was on your side, no?
At 5 minutes to midnight, he joined.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was very, very last minute, but I'm pleased that he did. I'm pleased that he did. He helped us get it over the line. He gave us a Brexit, not perfect, but it's a Brexit, and then proved to be a very bad leader. Elected as a Conservative, governed as a liberal social democrat.
Interesting point, just germane to our conference. Boris Johnson, someone born in New York, got upset when the IRS said, "Hey, you got to pay us for selling that house." I also think he was flying to Mexico at one point, and they wouldn't let him fly. They wouldn't let him get on the plane because he was flying through the U.S. Right?
That's right. Yeah, no, he was.
Like, where's your U.S. passport? You got it. It says right here.
Yeah. He did have problems with that. I mean, look, Boris, entertaining character. He could make you laugh, but not really a conservative, not really a free marketeer, not really a libertarian. He'd write this stuff in newspaper articles, and it would sound very good, but as Prime Minister, just didn't have the courage to carry on with it.
Is there a U.S. politician you compare him to?
Difficult to say that, because Boris is pretty unique. I mean, who else goes around quoting Latin all the time? Difficult, but I think a lot of. I mean, look, if I look at the Republican Party, there have been a lot over the years that I've followed this, who get elected on very conservative platforms and then become rhinos.
The Republican in name only concept, yeah. Is that something similar, do you think, to Boris?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Boris was the same. We've seen the same in Australia. All around the English-speaking world, we see conservative parties that have completely lost their link with entrepreneurship, with small business. Oh, look, I spent 20 years in Brussels, right? Brussels, it literally is the model for what the globalists want for the world. It's a world in which all law is proposed by people that cannot be voted for and cannot be removed. The European Commission, the unelected Commission, have sole right to propose legislation. The lobbying influences on them from the big multinationals are beyond belief. It's golf on a Friday morning at the Royal Waterloo Golf Club. It's lunches, dinners, drink receptions. And so you finished up with that system of government where big companies can now effectively write the rules for their own industry. They're part of a status quo. They have huge media support on their side. And it's very difficult. And when you're elected and you go to DC, you go to London, you go to Canberra, or wherever it may be, and suddenly, 24/7, all the influences around you are driving you in a different direction. And unless you're somebody who's in politics with real conviction, you get swayed by it. You see, there are two types of people in politics. There are those who want to be something, i.e. rank, title, position, and there are those who want to do something, and they're the campaigners for causes that they passionately believe in. So just through this process, conservatives change. But here's the funny thing. When conservatives have the moral courage and belief to actually keep the fight going, guess what happens? They win elections. And they win elections because actually there is still a majority for common sense.
The average person doesn't want multinationals.
Of course.
They want the guy at the pub. They want the guy starting the small business.
Yeah, and you ask people, do you think we should replace the term pregnant women with pregnant people? Well, you know what the answer is.
Menstruating people.
Yeah, I mean, just the whole thing. But you need conservative leaders and politicians with the courage to cut through that rubbish, with the courage to take the abuse from the New York Times, the courage to get abused on Twitter. And my view, after 3 decades or so involved with this intimately, is there are too few of those people.
It's too hard to take the hate.
People and believe you me, the other side do hate. The other side do hate. I mean, it is. We kind of think they're a bit soft in the head. They think we're evil. Yeah. They think we're evil, and they think there are no limits to where they're prepared to go to try and get their point of view. You see, they actually think they're better people than us.
Well, that's for sure.
They think they're morally superior
that's
human beings.
That's how the Western world has turned into, is that everyone thinks they're a better person. It's created a great chasm.
It's very dangerous. I mean, it seems to me that part of the reason we fought 2 world wars at massive cost was for us to have the right to disagree, but to do so still respecting the other person because they have a different point of view. We're losing that. And the education system is teaching kids that there are 2 worldviews, and rather than you make your own mind up, one is virtuous And if you believe in the other one, you're virtually a neo-Nazi.
You should be banned from the pubs.
I mean, it's incredible.
Story then in a moment. You said recently that we'll get back to Brexit and where you can go to find that freedom. But you said recently that let me make sure I'm getting this correct. The Conservatives deserve to lose. Basically.
Yes, they've let us down terribly. They've let us down on energy. They've let us down on borders. They've let us down on not completing Brexit. They've let us down by not having not one piece of legislation from Brussels has been simplified, cleared up, removed. They deserve to lose at every level. But in the last few weeks, Boris has gone. We've got Liz Truss, and whatever her background, she's actually been saying some quite sensible things. So give everybody a fair chance. And our new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has today introduced a package of measures, and it's the first Conservative budget I've cheered since 1986.
I think you were concerned about Liz Truss. You think now she could perform?
I was asked of the two, which one did I think was best? I said it was the wrong question. It was a question of which was the least worst. and I thought she was the least worst, but I'm prepared to give her a go. You have to be in life. Give everybody a chance. But Kwarteng, the Chancellor, is cutting taxes. He's increasing investment opportunities for small business in investment zones with big tax breaks. This is the most conservative budget we've seen since 1986. Now, it may be too late. It may be too late. So much damage has been done. UK productivity, energy policy, so much has gone wrong. But at least they're now beginning to say the right things and promising to get rid of excessive EU rules which govern the investment markets, the insurance markets, and everything else. It's taken a long time.
45% income tax rate would be whacked, 20% banned, down to 19%.
Yeah, 45 to 40, 20 to 19, and crucially, the corporation tax rise, which was going to be 19% to 25%, has been scrapped. These are all big signals to business. Big signals that at last we've got a government with some idea of what entrepreneurship is. And I've been a lone voice in British politics, a lone voice in our country, standing up for the 5.5 million men and women that run their own businesses. You see, I think that momentum within an economy doesn't come from the top down, doesn't come from 5 big multinationals building a car factory. It comes from millions of simultaneous acts of men and women deciding to do stuff. And the driver of much of that must be supply-side reform. You see, what they've done in Brussels and elsewhere, is the more regulations they introduce, the better it is for the big guys. Because the small guys can't afford, the barriers to entry in the markets become high. And when you get that, innovation goes down, competition goes down. That's what I want to fight against. And look, I want to say this to you. I got into politics from business. Yes, of course I believe in the nation state. Yes, of course I believe in national democracy. Yes, of course I believe in proper border controls and our culture and all of those things. But above all, economically, I am a Reaganite Thatcherite. I think those reforms that we put in place in the 1980s freed people. I love Reagan's. What are the worst 8 words in the English language? I'm here from government, I've come to help you. But I love all that stuff. I wanted Brexit to make London and the UK the kind of place that delegates who come to a Nomad Capital Conference would actively discuss as being a place to go. That's one of my main motivations for Brexit.
Is it that place today?
Not yet.
What has to be done to get it there in your mind?
Well, does it have the ability to be? Yes. Sure. Because with Brexit, we're now in charge. Am I beginning to see, from this new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, some of the thinking that I would approve of, and you would approve of, and many of your delegates would approve of? Yes. Now, promising to do things and doing them are two different things. But if we implement some of the signs we're seeing very early on, that I'd love to come back in 2 years' time and say, guys, you know what? We've got a sensible regulatory environment. We've got good rules. Sterling is still cheap. It's a great place to invest.
The sterling is cheap. I, as a small business owner, who I happen to believe, by the way, in the Western world, the multinationals don't get demonized enough. The guy making £1 million, £2 million who built a business up, he's the evil rich to too many people. But if I wanted to come and start a business, the UK did cancel earlier this year the UK investor visa on the idea that Russians are 18% of it, and that we don't want Russians coming in the days before the Russia-Ukraine war. What are your thoughts on investment and entrepreneurship, immigration, and what the UK can do to bring people, if they should?
Well, I mean, generally what the UK has done over the last few years is to encourage mass immigration of unskilled labour. And then they wonder that our productivity rate's going down. I mean, it's unbelievable. And we've discouraged, by getting rid of non-dom status, by even getting rid of VAT-free shopping for those going back to Qatar or wherever it may be. We've done everything to discourage high net worth individuals coming into London who might invest some money. I mean, this under a Conservative government. I mean, they're not being Conservative.
People think, oh, if I just vote for Trump, if Liz Truss gets in, everything's solved, just relax.
No, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I tell you what, I mean, if we take economics or social issues too, we know the left's agenda. We know it's command economy. We know it's high tax. We know it's high regulation. Yeah. We know it's all redistribution. We know it's welfare, 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 welfare. We know all that stuff. I blame the blooming Conservatives for not having the moral courage to stand up to this because they're frightened of bad newspaper headlines or abuse on Twitter or being refused entry to restaurants. I mean, you know, whatever it is. So look, again, with Brexit, we've now got the chance to sort this out. You can forget the European Union. Forget it. You know, it is not going to be competitive. It is not going to work. You've got a north-south divide on a currency that should never have been introduced. You know, the euro should never have ever gone to the Mediterranean. You've got an east-west cultural split with Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic having very different social values to Western Europe. It is an over-regulated model. It isn't going to change. Their answer to all problems is more regulation. So, you know, don't invest money in France. If you've got a brain in the right place, do not invest money in France.
I've said Spain and I've said Italy.
Yeah.
And we can add France to the list.
Oh, absolutely. Employment legislation, all of it impossible. The UK, we now have the opportunity. We're beginning to see a few little green shoots coming from this new Chancellor of the Exchequer that he might explain it. And I said to you, and I repeat the point, I want to sit here with you in 2 years' time and say, guys, we got it right.
For me, I don't run the next Facebook. We run a very profitable, mid-stage business. There's not really an opportunity in countries like the UK for me to say, hey, I want to come and I'm going to hire 10 people. I'm going to put in X million pounds. We're looking, fine, listen, the policy can be, we want the next Merck, we want the next Facebook, we want the next whatever. And I understand a lot of countries have phased out, hey, don't come and run a hawker stall. We're not issuing residence permits for that. But should there be some middle ground to say, all right, bring in £2 million and we're going to vet you, and please come and bring your money and your jobs. It seems to be gone out of favour in the UK.
Of course. We've even the Conservative Party have adopted the anti-rich narrative.
Yeah. When they canceled the investor visa earlier this year, it seemed to me to be, how dare these pigs with their £2 million that they're going to invest in our equities or in our capital markets, how dare they be allowed to come and live here?
That's because Boris Johnson and the posh boys that have been running the Conservative Party have bowed down to the mob. The left-wing mob have had their way with the Conservative Party. He's gone. He failed. He's gone. And we now have an opportunity with an untested Prime Minister, but at least an opportunity to begin to turn that around.
Do you believe that the people of the UK would agree with that, and that because you're painting it as it's catering to the mob, catering to the old days, pre-Brexit of the European Union, or is this is politically expedient? People don't want people with £2 million pounds because they imagine it's the Qatari guy.
Leadership is about saying things that at that moment in time may well be a minority position. But you explain to people why you're doing it. You show them the journey that you're on. You tell them what the prize is. There's the sunlit uplands over there. This is where we're taking you. And by persuasion and example, you win them over to you. Followership is saying, let's get an opinion poll, or we'll do what they say. Boris was a follower. He was a cheerleader, good with the pom-poms in a campaign, but leadership is about doing unpopular things. Leadership is about taking tough decisions, but being right and proving that to a wider audience, and that's what's been lacking.
Look at the EU. I suspect that you would have the same opinion about those states, because you see some of the people that you were with in the European Parliament, the folks in the European Commission that are constantly stepping on the stuff that we talk about. You shouldn't be able to get a golden visa. Portugal needed money. Spain needed money. Greece needed money. They were at the brink. Hey, come and buy some of our properties. Nobody wants them. Yeah. Why? Perhaps because Greece, 7x property taxes, or because they just did a terrible job.
Yeah, Malta too. Malta. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, they were desperate. They did it because they were desperate, but fine, Look, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s, the UK being the sick man of Europe. Income tax, 1979, top-rate income tax.
90%?
83%.
Yeah. The Beatles.
An unearned income as high as 98%. But what was the point? What was the point of any of it?
Didn't the Beatles leave?
Everyone left.
Everyone left.
Everyone left. All our young talent left, and it flooded off to the US, to Australia. Yeah. Was a very popular destination as well. So we've seen the brain drain. We've seen what high taxes do. We've seen what a complete disaster all of this stuff is. And yet, under this Conservative government, we've gone to the highest tax burden since the 1940s, the highest tax burden since before the late Queen took the throne. And that's what this Conservative government did. That's why they're going to lose the next election. That's why they deserve to lose the next election. But they do have just one. Liz Truss is all we have. She is the last. This is Custer's last stand with Liz Truss. This is all we've got.
Let me come back to the competition in a minute, but you mentioned the Queen. I was actually kind of surprised by your stand. What is your thought on, obviously, the late Queen, the monarchy? Where do we go from here?
I mean, look, we had a civil war, a bloody civil war. We then went to a Puritan dictatorship, which became absolutely appalling. We then had years of flux. We then, in 1688, developed a form of government where elected politicians would be the prime ministers with executive power, but we'd have a head of state above that who would be apolitical, would have duties and responsibilities. The armed forces would share their allegiance not to the government, but to the monarch, but the monarch would rise above politics in the attempt that symbolism would be a unifying force for a country. Do you know what? It's worked pretty well. Yeah. You get good kings, bad kings. In fact, we always get good queens. Don't ask me why. We always seem to get very good queens. I think Elizabeth herself. Well, look, I'll be honest with you. I was coming up in the car to London. The radio was on. There was an energy debate in the House, a long overdue energy debate in the House of Commons, and I heard that a piece of paper had been rushed in to the Prime Minister and then handed over the dispatch box to the Leader of the Opposition. And the Leader of the Opposition had sort of gone white in the face and walked out. I knew immediately what it was. I felt sick to the bottom of my stomach. And I'll be honest with you, when the formal announcement came that she died at 6:30 that night, I'm not ashamed to say I shed tears. And I was live on television at 7. I thought, how on earth am I going to pull myself together to do this? Why was I so emotional? Why were millions of Brits so emotional? Why was last Monday? I've never seen London like it. You couldn't move. There seemed to be millions of people everywhere just coming privately to pay their respects. I think number one, 70 years of exemplary leadership. I think number two, never tainted by any scandals, any corruption, never put a foot wrong, behaved beautifully and with manners. But I think number three, the real reason I cried was because of the values she represented. She represented values of honor, duty, patriotism, Christianity, service, the family, caring for each other, at times putting others' interest before your own. And I thought, gosh, do these values die with her? I was really worried, scared of what's to come. And yet, the response has been so overwhelming. Almost the reassertion, the reaffirmation of those values, not amongst everybody, I accept, but amongst a lot of people, does give me some hope. Does give me some hope. And it reminds me, and it should remind all of us, there is still a majority for common sense in all of our countries. There is still a majority that want liberty, that want freedom of speech. Still a majority that don't want government controlling every aspect of our lives. And we have to harness that.
The anti-monarchy movement in the UK?
Smaller now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you go back to George III, who lost America, I mean, you know, not a very good king, wasn't just unpopular in the colonies, he was very unpopular back in the UK. And we had a succession of kings who were, well, how can I put it, drunken philanderers. I mean, it's the only way you could describe. I mean, people who had more children than Boris Johnson. I mean, that's saying something. And then Queen Victoria. It was Queen Victoria that really re-established the popularity of the monarchy. And through the House of Windsor in the 20th century, well, we had one major blip there. Edward VIII, who of course married the American divorcee Wallis Simpson, who it turned out was a fan of Hitler and National Socialism. I mean, we've had our ups and downs with this institution. Right now, I think what's been amazing about, you know how divided societies are and how bitter some of the arguments are. And somehow the Queen transcends all of that. And yes, of course, you have an anti-monarchy movement. Yes, of course, you have the New York Times and CNN being vile, not just about the institution, but about her as well. But I don't think monarchy's ever been more popular in Britain than it is today.
Walk me through the crowning moment for you when you get to walk into the European Parliament, the unelected, well, in this case, but you know, who represents this kind of unelected infrastructure, and announce it's done, we're out.
That day was, so the referendum was on the Thursday, we got the result Friday morning. Brussels immediately announced emergency debate 3 p.m. Monday in the European Parliament.
That sounds very bureaucratic, by the way, that would wait until 3 p.m.
Well, of course. But then, in justification, people had to fly in from all over Europe to get there. So 3 p.m. Monday, so I went over on Sunday night, took a couple of very heavy security guards with me. Anyway, I thought I'll choreograph this. I'm going to get this right. I'll leave the office. I'll get into the front door at the top of the room, top of the Parliament. I'll get there 3 or 4 minutes to 3. I'll stage this right. They'll all be in there. I can make my big entrance. So I come down from the office in the lifts and I'm walking through the corridors and there's all sorts of words I won't use in this interview being shouted at me. And
people are shouting at you inside.
Oh, in the lift as I'm walking through. Yeah, just abuse, huge abuse.
These such
and these
smooth, untouchable.
Yeah. Oh no, really upset. Anyway, I get through the door, 3 minutes to 3. It's packed. 700 MEPs there. But the boss man, the real boss, of course, hasn't been elected. The real boss was Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission. And I was in seat number 20, and unbelievably, he was in seat number 21. I mean, as close as you. And how they ever allowed me that choreography, I'll never know. Anyway, Juncker was there ahead of me, which surprised me. So Juncker was there, standing in the well, with about 100 journalists around him. And the journalists are allowed in until the gavel gets banged and proceedings begin. So Juncker had beaten me to it. And so as I walk down the steps, there's a combination of cheering and jeering going on. Juncker sees me, arms outstretched, and I go down and he hugs me. And he whispers in my ear, you might have to edit this, he whispers in my ear, "You bastard." I, of course, burst out laughing. And no one could work out on the front pages the next day why he and I are having such fun. And then I got up, and I didn't know what I was going to say. But I I kind of thought maybe, just maybe, they might show me a little bit of respect.
Because you accomplished something.
Because it was a big deal.
No, forget it.
No chance. I got up, there were 500 of them booing, and that's when I said, when I came here 17 and a half years ago, I said I would lead a campaign to take Britain out of the European Union, and you all laughed at me. Well, I said, you're not laughing now.
Now it's an emergency.
And that line has lasted a long time. Yeah. But the whole emphasis from day one was how to reverse it. How to reverse it. That was the whole debate in Brussels, much of the debate in the UK.
These countries are democracies?
No. No. Globalism, the phenomenon of globalism views democracy as an inconvenience. It gets in the way of their grand plans and their big ideas. And if just occasionally the voters are impotent enough to do something silly, they have to be overruled. And indeed, the Danes 30 years ago voted against the Maastricht Treaty, made to vote again. The Irish voted against the European Treaty, made to vote again. And they thought they could bully us into it. And thank goodness our nerve held, just, but not the Conservative Party. They had to be beaten again and again and again until they finally got the message.
It took a while.
It took a long time.
So we ran into you in Montenegro. You are exploring other places. Tell us about where you're looking for freedom, where you think opportunities are.
Well, I completely understand the nomad capitalist mentality. People living in overregulated countries where, taxes can be applied retrospectively. I mean, can you even believe we're having this conversation? But we are.
Decades sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's astonishing. And I think people living in, I've noticed actually here, lots of Canadians.
In Mexico. Oh,
here,
it's overwhelmed.
At your conference, but living under Trudeau.
Yep.
Where anything's possible, including, seizing your bank accounts or freezing your bank accounts. It's not surprising. So capital will always go to look for where it's most secure, most solid, safest, and gives the greatest level of opportunity. And the reason for Montenegro, very simple. I mean, it's a small country, but actually, through their tax structures, through their attitude towards business and investment, is a very positive place. They're outside the European Union. They say they're going to join, but they're not really. So I think it's interesting. It's very interesting to go and look at these jurisdictions. And this is why, in many, many ways, I think your setup here is likely to get bigger in the next few years, because there is this fear of what governments can do retrospectively.
For sure. Are there other places in Europe or further afield that you have on your radar?
Well, I think that Montenegro is my most obvious one in Europe. Okay. There are, I think, to be honest with you, I'm sorry to say this, but my obsession is we make London that place too. I can't get away from that. And I think that will happen, and I think it will happen in time.
Albania next door has said that they're going to roll out a citizenship program. Of course, the bureaucrats in Europe are saying, "Oh, we're going to do this to you. We're going to do that to you." What's your insight on that?
Well, I'd be very careful about Albania. Very careful. I think when you go to Albania, when you go to Bulgaria, you go to Romania, the problem you've got is the power of organised crime is so great. It's so great. That's why Albania would concern me.
You wouldn't want to be an Albanian citizen. Would you be afraid of what the European Commission is going to do to shut them out of the system if they were to go down that path?
Yeah. I mean, I would. But I mean, it's quite possible that in terms of depositing capital and running a business, that Albania could be a good jurisdiction from that regard. But I'm not sure you want to live there.
Sure. I think for most people, citizenship by investment, they wouldn't live there.
No.
What do you think about, again, just because this is your area of expertise, people in Europe, the bureaucrats, looking at programs, the Commonwealth, the Caribbean programs, the St. Lucia's, where we share the same queen, or the same king.
Yeah.
Are they going to push the UK? Are they going to, within themselves, say, "Hey, we don't want you to come here because you allow people with money to come and get citizenship"?
I think the Commonwealth is going to be one of the big geopolitical centres of influence and debate over the next few years. I think that the king, as he now is, the King's position as head of the Commonwealth is very important. 2.5 billion people, living in the Commonwealth. Add the Americans in, you're getting near 3 billion people. Part of a bloc with shared history, part of a bloc with huge sharing of language, part of a bloc, in most, not all cases, of common law, similar contract law, a lot of shared culture, a lot of shared music, a lot of shared film, many of those things. China recognizes the potential power of the Commonwealth and is attacking it daily. Barbados,
for example, yeah.
Why? They got rid of the Queen as head of state without a referendum. Why? Chinese investment. The Solomon Islands, now allowing the Chinese Navy to do some refueling and some shipyard work less than 1,000 miles away from Australia. Strategically, that's a very big deal. Why is it happening? Chinese investment. So the Belt and Road initiative is willfully being used to try and take down the Anglosphere influence that exists within the Commonwealth. And this is where I think an American president and a British prime minister need to spend some time together, days together, working out a strategy. Because I do think actually potentially the Commonwealth is one of the strongest ways for us to stop the economic domination of China around the world. So it really matters. It really matters.
The message you hear in places, let's take Malaysia, for example, or now even one of the big U.S. allies in South America, Colombia, now going left wing, not going to be a U.S. ally perhaps anymore. I think what you hear in these places is, what was the U.S. doing for us? What do you say about that? How do you get together to solve that? Because they're saying, hey, we were with them, and there's a better deal somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, we can all sell our souls.
True.
There are always higher bidders. I think it's important for us to show, when I'm talking America and Britain, it's important for us to show when we work with these countries that it isn't just about money.
Values.
It's about values. And maybe we haven't pushed that enough. Interestingly, I think Mike Pompeo did understand this. I think Mike Pompeo used his influence when he went around the world to say to people, look, the Chinese will offer you all this money, but consider what the cost of all that is and compare that to your relationship with us.
Sure. Talk about people from other countries, maybe with other values. Again, next door to Montenegro. I've watched a number of interviews when I was looking at some of your stuff. We spent some time in Serbia, President Vučić. You have all these people that come from Paris, from London, they interview him. He has a relationship with Putin, has a relationship with the West, has been trying to get into the EU since God knows when. And they also don't want to do it. Of course, the Serbians don't want it. The Serbian government doesn't want it. It's not happening. They give the guy a hard time, whether you agree with him on everything or not. Isn't it pretty unfair the way that the media, where we're from, picks on these guys? And
look, I think Serbia are playing the game rather cleverly. I think they've got a foot in both camps. There are very, very few countries in that position. They're potentially in quite a powerful position. And as you say, they won't join the European Union in a month of Sundays. That isn't going to happen. Look, none of us know how this game's going to play out. None of us know how this Ukraine game is going to play out. Putin clearly in beginning to be in domestic political trouble. Yes, there are rallies in Moscow supporting him, but it's undeniable that tens of thousands of young men have sought to flee the country. It's undeniable that the military losses in human terms they've taken have been very big. It's undeniable that Putin just won't stop. He will keep going. So exactly how this all plays out, it's very difficult to tell. I think it is, we have to think about the possibility that in the end, his own generals get rid of him. But this war drags on for another year, another 2 years. It becomes attritional. I don't see him using nuclear weapons of any kind. I hope I'm right. Also, the Soviets put very good checks and balances in. There isn't a red button on Putin's desk. It doesn't work like that. There is kind of 3 layers of control that any decision like that would have to go through. And I like to think such an order, if it was given, would not be obeyed.
2 final questions. Does Donald Trump in the United States run in 2024? If you were an American, would you support Donald Trump?
Yes, of course.
To both?
Well, would I support Donald Trump? Yes. Is he going to run again? Look, I've been a friend of his now for some years, and he's somebody that I can talk to on the phone, someone that I go and see. I go to Mar-a-Lago a few times a year. I enjoy his company. He is a New Yorker of a certain age, from a certain background, and you know as well as I do. That's what New Yorkers were like. They're in your face. That's his style. I think as president, I thought the big wins were overseas, actually. I thought the America being turned from a warmonger into a peacemaker was a big deal. I think the Abraham Accords are a lasting testament to him on that regard. I think even crossing the line into North Korea was the most astonishing thing for an American president to do. I think the strength and friendship that he showed to us in the United Kingdom, and recognizing that bond and its potential in a wider Commonwealth world, etc. He got that. He got that. Domestically, do you know what? I was with him on the 29th of February 2020. I was backstage with him, 29th of February 2020, just the two of us. He was getting ready to go on live at CPAC. I had 15, 20 minutes with him. I thought for all the world he'd win 40 states. And if COVID hadn't happened, he would have won 40 states. It would have been huge. It wasn't to be. I don't like the way he overtalks about the stolen election. I think that narrative needs to become a more positive. We're going to clean the system up, give the American system integrity, because over half of voters are worried about the system. He's 76. He's in very good health. He really is in good health. He's the only guy I know who looks fitter after 4 years of presidency than he looked before, because the others all look a bit haggard. If he wants to run again, it's his. Nobody can challenge him within the Republican Party.
He wins the primary.
Oh yeah, he wins it easily. He wins it easily. Does he win the election? Well, I'm biased because he's a friend. So I'm going to give you an answer that is the answer that I want to happen, and it may lack a little bit of objectivity. Others, who are less connected than me, think Ron DeSantis has proved himself to be so effective, not just in terms of narrative and oratory, but in terms of what he's actually done in Florida, that they think he'd be the better candidate. There are others that could run too, but they're the two front runners. Luckily for them, who the hell have the Democrats got? Biden, forget it. The VP, forget it. Gavin Newsom, look at his record in California on everything from education to homelessness to whatever it may be. So look, I think the Republicans are in a good position. I personally think Trump is still the man that can get the blue-collar vote in those Midwestern states like Michigan. Time will tell.
Lastly, your prediction for the year ahead. I know you're working on supporting positive economic change in the UK. What do you see for 2023?
I think inflation will last longer than people realize. I think what we learned years ago is that inflation is a disease of money caused by government. You can't just blame Putin for this. Monetary inflation has been coming down the track for a long, long time. And the idiots in the central bank have had all of this completely wrong. So inflation is here to stay. Recession is coming. How big that recession is, I don't know, but it's definitely coming. There are potentially more nasty shocks to come in the energy markets. This assumption that, no, it'll all be fine. Gas prices are going down. It's all going to be fine. Well, we'll see what a cornered Putin does. The big takeouts are having a proper energy policy is vital for any country. And for an investor, the lesson of all previous recessions, even if a whole load of overvalued stocks go down 30%, 40%, you know what? There's always a flight to quality. There's always a flight to good companies. It always happens. What's so funny in a world of ESG investing is what's done well over the last year: coal, oil and tobacco. They're the ones that have really yielded for people over the last year. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. There is no quick cure. But good solid businesses, making the right products, entrepreneurs going into the right places, there'll still be plenty of opportunities.
Return to things that are real.
I think so, yes. I really do think so. And the whole game, the whole tech game, well, it's just like the dot-com bust 20 years ago. Some of these firms will succeed brilliantly, a lot will go to the wall. And the other thing I'm looking at, and you're covering it here at the conference, is every crisis has seen the size of government grow exponentially, particularly during the pandemic. And now talk that governments might in a few years' time want to have their own central bank digital currencies. We're being driven into a cashless society. Shops not taking cash, ATM machines disappearing. I think that interest in the crypto space is going to grow and grow and grow, because ultimately what people see there is freedom.
Is the UK going to be with that or against that?
Well, it's a very interesting opportunity. I mean, what I would like to see is the City of London become one of the big transaction centres, one of the big clearing centres for crypto exchanges. That's a battle. That's a debate we'll have.
It seems to be going in the wrong direction.
Completely.
Yeah.
At the moment, doing crypto in the UK is virtually impossible. I think that needs to change. But I think it's interesting. On the American side of the pond, crypto is looked at as increasingly as a means of exchange or a means of posting your NFT or whatever it may be. On the European side of the British and European side of the pond, crypto at the moment is looked at rather like having a bet on the 3:30 horse race at Newmarket. And we think of it as a speculative investment. Right. There isn't much thought in Europe yet about its adoption and usage as a means of exchange. That will all change. And so I think there are still some very big opportunities in that space.
It'll be interesting to watch. Nigel Farage, looking forward to dinner, and pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.